Bam! What's up, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic, deep diving, having a good time while doing it. Before we get into today's content, a little bit of housekeeping. Do me a favor, if you are not getting my email, you should be. I send it every morning. It is free, and I can get a lot more sort of in the weeds of some topics that tend to be a little bit more on the controversial side in those emails than I can on the various social media platforms. I've been doing the Master Chim letter for almost a decade at this point. And those of you guys that have been around since then can attest to how much more fun we have behind the wall of that email identity, right? And for you guys who are new to my content and enjoy these videos, and I'm streaming right now on YouTube and a couple of Facebook pages, if you're enjoying that, I would definitely tell you to get on that email list. The link is in the description, or if you are listening and cannot check that out right now, you could just go to masterchim.com/email and it'll bring you to the opt-in form, right? So today is a pretty, I think, significant topic to cover. And before we do that, let's get into see who's here. Jesse, what's going on? Aaron's in the hospital. What's going on, darling? Hope all is going well. Give us the update when you can. I'm super happy for you guys. Little Goose, what's up, my man? Looking forward to meeting you, dude. Dad's told me a lot about you, but I will see you soon, hopefully. Corey, what's going on? Jamie in the house. So Jamie keeps hitting asterisk on pounds. Asterisk pounds, 14 ounces. I don't know if that's 8. I'm like looking at my keyboard, but congratulations are in order to you guys. And I appreciate you guys keeping me and the rest of the guys here in the loop. But super congratulations for you guys. 8 pounds, 14 ounces is a baby. That is a baby-sized baby. So good for you guys. Super happy. All right. So something of a transition now. Let's get to the topic, which happens to be liars. And it is something that over the years, I use it as a label that activates a lot of men in their dealings with other people. And activates, if you guys don't know, it's the masculine form of triggering, right? So we could say lesser men would be triggered by this idea of lying and liars that are in their lives. And after this talk today, I don't know if you are going to completely agree with me. I don't know if you're going to have evolved or changed your perspective of what lying is. But the one thing I will say at the end of this conversation is you will have a lot more information to come to those conclusions with. I'm somebody who, whenever faced with some sort of stimulus, if I get emotional, or there's a tendency to get emotional, I want to sort of take that thing that warranted that reaction from me or triggered that reaction from me and just sort of separate it and observe exactly what it's about. Why is it that this thing initiated in me this emotional response? And investigating and breaking these things down, you tend to realize that not everything is as simple as it seems. And there's even value in that statement that I'll get back to later on. But when it comes to lying, I think that it's very difficult for us to define, first off, and I made some allusion to this in the email this morning. It's very hard for us to determine truth. There was a podcast episode a couple of years ago between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. And the conversation that they had was much anticipated by a lot of their followers and sycophants alike online. And it really amounted to like an hour-plus conversation on what truth was. And I would say for the most part, everybody was like, this was very anticlimactic. This is not the conversation that these two should have been having. And I was a little bit unique, I think, in that sense, in that I saw that conversation as exactly what it was supposed to be at that point. Coming to a sort of basic understanding of what terms mean and the implications that arguments are going to be built on uh, later on with those terms is something that I think people are responsible for. Before you're about to have a somewhat conflict based conversation or a debate with somebody, I think everybody needs to agree on the terms that they're using. And these two very intelligent, very educated, very well respected individuals in their own worlds, they couldn't even agree on what truth was. Obviously, Sam Harris being the guy who was a little bit more academic and I would say empirical in the lens and the bias that he was applying to the term, whereas Jordan Peterson was much more of a relativist sort of position where perspective was to be applied if we were going to, continue to follow somebody's truth as if it was a truth that could exist outside of somebody else's truth. And I think maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, a little bit of a cop out there, but I'd say that at the base level, we could agree that not everybody agrees what truth is. So then, if we can't even collectively agree on what truth is in the most general of senses, and not saying that we can't agree on subsets or subcategories of what truth is, but if we can't agree that this is the one catch-all term that people tend to use it as, then how then could we determine or say that lying or somebody being a liar is also a catch-all term, devoid of any significant subset type categories? If I'm somebody who is determining the validity or the truth of somebody's communication, I follow a certain amount of criteria. And to be honest, this isn't something obviously that I do consciously. Whenever somebody's speaking to me, I'm running these formulas like I'm doing math in my head or something. This is, and I forced myself to write this down in preparation for this talk today. But this is what I have, right? This is what I have. And if I were to explain how I tend to process people's information as I listen to it, this is the list that I would share. So number one, I'm looking at the reliability of a source. When I hear somebody communicating to me, the skepticism at which I handle their communication, or just the acceptance maybe on the other end that I handle their communication, is based first and foremost on the reliability of the source, the reliability of that individual. What do I mean by that? Do they have a track record for saying something in a way that I understood it to be, and then in fact it turned out to be exactly that? If they're saying, hey, I think if you put, if they're giving me a recipe for how much, jellies should be on a jelly sandwich. I'm just thinking of shit here. And they tell me you should do this, this, and this, and it'll be the best jelly sandwich, peanut butter jelly sandwich you ever had. And I do that. And it is, in fact, the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich I ever had. It's like, yeah, okay. He's starting to establish a track record, right? So the first thing is, when we're dealing with a source, there's a reliability factor, right? The second thing is to be considered is the intention. What is the potential motivating factors for somebody saying something, stating it as a given thing? If you walk into a kitchen and there's a little kid with cookie crumbs on his shirt, and you ask him, "Did you eat the cookies?" and he says no, we understand that there could be some intention for him saying no, because there is a sort of consequence waiting in the wings that he would intend to avoid. And so we factor that in. It's like, okay, this little 5-year-old is usually pretty reliable, but given the context of the scene in which I'm interpreting his communication, I would say that there would be expect some intention for him to be less than completely truthful. So the intention of the communication is to be considered. The other thing is the actual ability to communicate should be considered. Some people are more eloquent speakers than others. If I look at somebody like Jordan Peterson, you will scarcely find somebody who is more effective in their ability to articulate certain ideas and concepts, to convey with a high degree of accuracy abstract concepts that he wants to share with other individuals. His ability to communicate is very, very impressive. It's at a very high level. There are going to be some people who do not have as linear and direct a communicative style. To draw some sort of a contrast, I will use somebody like Donald Trump. Donald Trump speaks like a character in a poem, who basically creates this collection of words and sentiments that together, build an idea that he's trying to convey, but never as direct and linear as maybe we would prefer. But that is his communication style. And if we do not consider his communication style, or we judge it through a lens that was married up or established by a communication style like Jordan Peterson's, then the likelihood of us consider somebody like Trump to be lying would be higher. Or at least maybe not lying, but us to just not understand what he's saying would be higher. I think I know what he just said, but I'm not quite certain. Whereas with a guy like Jordan Peterson, the way he communicates, it's so much more linear and direct that he leaves a lot less to the imagination. So the reliability of the source, the perceived intention of the source, like what's in it for them, and then finally the communication style and or just ability of the individual. If somebody doesn't speak English, or they speak a very low level of English, they might be trying to pick a word here and there to represent what they're trying to convey, knowing, and they in the moment know that they cannot express themselves as eloquently as they could in their mother tongue. But in this representational style of coding, I guess, with individual English words, they're trying to build up an understanding, right? And so this communication style needs to be considered. What are they trying to say based on who they are? Which leads to two things. One of them that, John, what's going on? You're on Saxa. Good to see you. Cherrytown Vibe. What's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Which leads me to an idea, a concept that I've shared, for the first time years ago. And my coaching students, I definitely tried to convey this to them in a way that they could functionally apply its understanding to their everyday life and interactions. But all communication is metaphor. All communication is metaphor. Whenever somebody says something, they say it as them. In the three criteria that I had shared, the reliability, intention, and the communication style of the source, I would say if we say all communication is metaphor, it's really the sum total of those three criteria applied to the expectations we have for communication. All communication is metaphor. When I first introduced this idea, I shared a story, and it's funny because my daughter is 9 now, and this was back when she was, I think, 3, maybe 4. I was sitting in my living room. It was already after her bedtime, and she came out into the living room, and she was all upset. And I asked what was wrong. She said there was a monster under the bed. And if I were to ask, a group of people, should I have considered my daughter to be a liar? And most people would say, well, no, and I would say, why is she not a liar? Because clearly there's not a monster under her bed. They would say, well, she's only 3. Oh, so who the person is should be considered when determining the truth of what they're saying. Well, yeah, obviously. Well, not so obvious, it turns out, as adults when we start dealing with one another. So when I say all communication is metaphor, those are the types of situations where it's easily applied and understood. My daughter tells me there's a monster under the bed. I understand what she means. I understand she's 3. She doesn't have this huge collection of life experience to reference when trying to define and populate these mysteries that are presenting themselves to her. She heard a noise. She didn't know what it was. Maybe she had seen a scary movie or read a scary story or something to the effect, and there was some uncertainty, and the conclusion she came to was there was a monster. So I had to go in and, do the thing that most parents would do. It doesn't require a whole bunch of insight. I'd bring her to a bed and I'd look under and I said, no, there's no monster. And I said, actually, and I recall specific to that situation, I told her that there are actually good monsters that protect us against the bad monsters. And so if she ever heard any monster, and there wasn't anyone there, but if she ever did, it was probably one of the good ones that's looking to protect us against the bad ones. I created this mythology in the moment to just give her a better understanding of how to functionally deal with the circumstances. Certainly not the first one in history to do something like that. But the idea is at no point, as it applies to this conversation we're having today, at no point could I have called her a liar, right? Yet you'll have people who will look to put that label on somebody without the consideration of these factors that in another situation they would apply very easily. And it's that inconsistency that I would call into question. All right. So when I look at lies, then think of lies as puzzles that need to be solved. And when somebody's lying, it could be the truth to them. It could not be. Whether it is or not matters. There could be intention behind it, or there could not be. Whether there is or not intention, I would say matters. They could be saying something that we're not understanding because of the language or communication style that they're utilizing. If that's the case, it matters. So a lot of these things matter. So at the end of it, then, if we start looking at, well, what is the utility of even making these observations? There's an analogy I would share. A liar is to lying as a bully is to bullying, right? So years ago, I had posed a question to my followers and had asked them, if you had a son who could be a bully or be bullied, which would you choose? And the overwhelming majority of people, legitimately, the overwhelming majority of people, and these people being followers of my stuff, so we're not talking about run-of-the-mill, normies, they said, well, I'd rather my son be bullied than to be a bully. And I adamantly disagreed, and I made my case for it. And I think I won a couple of people over when I did. But basically what I said is there needn't be intent behind somebody bullying somebody else. And the other side of that observation is some people are so fragile, they are bullied at a dysfunctional level of intensity, at a dysfunctional level of pressure. If you say something to somebody who's super sensitive and they get upset or they get offended, and it's like, well, I don't even know how to communicate then, because I'm just trying to talk to this person the way I would anybody else, seem to be offending them, or listen, I get this shit all the time. I'm from New York. I curse a lot, and where I grew up, like, we curse, and I have been accused of all sorts of things, vulgar and this, and I can't disagree. I just understand that to these people, that is how they would weigh me according to the scale that they established. Well, similarly, when we're accusing somebody of being a liar, I would say that, well, there needn't be any intention behind somebody lying. somebody could be saying something in a way that, based on the criteria I shared, might actually be true in their eyes, yet you do not have the ability to apply it as being truthful. And if that's the case, then there's no intention behind the lie. Very similar to there being no intention behind the bullying. Yet we would use the term bully if given just this objective criteria for what a bully is. Well, there it is. Now, if you're going to say, well, it should have intention behind it, I would say, okay, but it's very difficult to determine that when looking to ascertain whether somebody is a bully or not. And because it's difficult to ascertain that in that application, I would say it's just as difficult, because of the analogous relationship between the two, to determine if somebody's a liar just because lying occurred. When somebody's labeled a bully, there is a consequence socially. That's why we have the label, right? That's why we charge it with the value and the definition that's been given, because it carries with it some consequence. And lying, being accused of being a liar, it also carries a consequence. I've been accused of being a liar at various times of my life. And I could tell you, it's in tribe, it's one of the most offensive things one could do. Certainly, it could be worse. You can call somebody, an adulterer, or a coward. Being the worst. Like, there's a whole list of things that carry a huge weight to them. I do not call people in tribe liars lightly. But again, even that's a preference, and it's a testament to my own code of ethics, and whereas some people, they have no problem being called a liar in or outside of tribe. When people outside of tribe call me things, I look at it as, just metaphor of influence and persuasion, and people will say things because they're trying to sort of generate some sort of outcome. And I understand that. In tribe, though, there's a little bit more weight to these terms. But again, when I look at somebody and question whether or not they are a liar, I have to ask myself, well, are they trying to misrepresent what it is that they're communicating to me? Are they unaware of what they're saying sounds like, to me, the person they're communicating to? But I think a good way to look at it is, there's not a lot of utility in calling somebody a liar, which I think is probably the most counterintuitive conclusion that I can come to in this kind of talk. Calling somebody a liar doesn't have a lot of use, because calling somebody a liar might change their, the expectations that one has of their communication, but it doesn't necessarily conclude with any accuracy the value of each communication they have. Some people say the best lies have an element of truth, to which I would say, so a lie then is not fully a lie. So then whatever's not a lie, I wouldn't wrap it in the label of being a lie then. You know what I mean? So it's like, if I said something's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I said, the best peanut butter jelly sandwiches have peanut butter in them, it's like, well, those are two different labels. Those are two different terms. You have peanut butter, but then you have peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich obviously infers that there is peanut butter in it. We can't say something's a lie and say the best lies have pieces of truth in them. Well, I would say that part of it is not a lie then, right? Wouldn't that make sense? Now, obviously, I'm being a little obtuse, right, at the moment, but there is, again, a need for us to really determine what is the utility of these labels that we're using. If somebody says something and they usually lie, right, what they say has usually been determined after the fact to be inaccurate, misrepresented, sometimes with intention, sometimes not, right? All it really means is that if we're trying to most efficiently use our resources based on this person's, credit score, we would have to be a little bit more investigatory with concluding the value of what he's saying. But this is based on the credit of the individual. This is based on the reputation of the individual. That doesn't necessarily say that whatever he's saying is then a lie. So then a liar becomes somebody who possibly lies, mostly lies, usually lies, because they don't always lie, right? Because that's a logical impossibility. Somebody can't always lie, right? It's especially not when engaging certain questions, right? There's a certain point where, and there are a lot of, logic exercises and puzzles that exploit that logical, consistency. But what is then the utility? The utility would be, I could just label somebody this and then I know what I'm getting. In other words, if I label somebody a liar, I therefore know what is occurring at a more transparent, way. Oh, well, he said that they're going to be here tomorrow. Oh, but he's a liar. Oh, okay. As if I get that information, I say he's a liar, and somehow that brings me to a greater understanding of truth. That doesn't do that at all. What it says is don't trust what it is that he's saying. So I would say somebody who is a liar is somebody like is like a tool, like a gauge, let's say, or a thermometer that isn't always accurate, right? Well, this thermometer, I could say, doesn't always work. That would be the equivalent of labeling somebody a liar. So again, I would ask, well, what's the point of it? If somebody, says, well, this guy's a liar, it removes information from you. It doesn't bring you any closer to truth. So again, if I'm looking at lies as puzzles, each one of them, when put through this filter, I would say, and this is devoid of labeling somebody a liar, I'm just looking at a lie specifically. I think a lot of times we're able to make sense of lies in a way where we do wind up better off. We wind up more informed after the process than not. And I think looking at it like a puzzle is something that obviously we can't just apply to things that we know are lies. So I understand there's a sort of complexity to the presentation of this topic. But, sometimes, deep diving on these topics, it's hard to avoid a certain level of complexity because there are just so many presumptions that people operate under that never really are exposed to any level of scrutiny like this. But again, if I'm taking something as significant as lying and looking to determine why is it bad, how do we make it better, what is it not, it requires some sort of pulling back the curtain and investigation like this, right? Let me see what you guys are doing over here in the comments. It could be the truth to them, as in they were given false information, so it's what they believe. I could say false information might be one category, but there could also be an embedded preference in their statement that they're unaware of. If I say Haagen-Dazs vanilla Swiss almond ice cream is the greatest ice cream flavor in the world, that is an overt preference share. So if somebody says, no, chocolate is the greatest ice cream flavor, the fact that they said no, negating my statement and offering theirs in its place, I would consider by my criteria their statement to be wrong. Whereas I could also say at the same time that they're right because there is an inherent preferential aspect to what it is that they're communicating as fact. And so there's a relativism there that needs to be considered. So if somebody's saying it could be the truth, or if I'm saying it could be the truth to them, maybe those are factors there. It could also be false information, right? It could also be a alternative use of the terms, being applied to the statement. If I say somebody's dumb, a rebuttal might be, no, they're actually in college and they did really well in their SATs, and I could say, no, I meant they can't talk, right? Somebody's deaf and dumb. If I say somebody's gay, somebody could be like, no, he's actually pretty sad, because they mean gay being happy, and I mean gay the other way, right? Literally. So sometimes the terms can undermine the relative nature, the seemingly relative nature to somebody's statement, right? I'm a bully of bullies, Jordan Saxa says. When people talk to me, they're like they wouldn't punch them in the mouth and defend myself. If they were talking trash, I back it up. I will say there's a value to making the case for a linear consistency in our communications. And sometimes when people threaten others, right? I'll fucking kill you. It's like, well, we could probably determine some circumstances that you would kill me, like if you were driving and you sneezed and I jumped in front of your car, you would kill me, right? If you were looking out the window and I was hanging from the windowsill on the outside, and when you grabbed the window pane and knocked my fingers off, you would kill me. Like, yeah, we would do. I would kill you, but that doesn't mean any necessarily linear promise as to infer that there should be some expectations on everybody else's end based on what they just said, right? So I don't believe in bluffing, right? Which ironically would make me a great bluffer. Because if I'm somebody who, the reason I don't believe in bluffing is I just think it is a very desperate way to conduct oneself. Now, I understand, like, if you're playing poker, the idea or the notion of bluffing is a valuable aspect of that game. You could lose all your money in poker. Well, the game of life is a little different, in that you could lose a lot more than your money when bluffing, which is why I don't feel that bluffing is a very valid strategy. It also it accepts deficiencies and weaknesses when we bluff. Bluffing, obviously, being a subset of what would be considered to be lying. With bluffing, we're misrepresenting our power and control and capability. I'd much rather be that strong and capable, so I wouldn't have to bluff, and there's a point where it's an emergency tactic that I would absolutely suggest should be used. But the other side of that is acknowledging you had to use it because you weren't strong enough to do what was necessary in the moment. I'll give you an example. In the book and the movie, The Godfather, when Michael Corleone was outside the hospital with one of the foot soldiers of his family, and they were expecting there to be a hit on his dad in the hospital, and they stayed in front and they put their hands in their pockets like they had guns, and the would-be assassins drove by and saw them and then drove away. Well, they were bluffing. In that situation, yeah, they had to. And you could say, oh, it's quick thinking. It was great. I'd be, every party needs a pooper. I'd be the guy to go, well, why the fuck weren't there people with guns in the front of the thing in the first place? And I think ultimately that is what I think is the process of bluffing, It's like, yeah, you got away with a weakness that you shouldn't have had, you know? And I think bluffing is a tactic for that, right? Right. Cherrytown Vibe, who also has a Godfather reference here. I'm thinking about that scene in The Godfather when the five families had the meeting after Sonny died. Dude lied straight to Don Corleone, and Don Corleone held his tongue just to not look like the bully. Well, I would say not only did he lie, but the way the story goes is they knew the truth. So there will be people, it's reflected in that story, it's reflected historically, it's reflected in other stories too, fictional stories. Sometimes the person who creates the lie actually has somebody who he's lying to completely understand the circumstance as a result of it. So sometimes, you know, if this guy lied to Don Corleone's face, but had some sort of ulterior plan, and Don Corleone knew that, could we argue that maybe it wasn't as much of a lie as we would think? Maybe his intentions were to have Don Corleone come to one conclusion, but maybe Don Corleone came to another as a result of the lie, which would undermine. Maybe we could argue it undermines the effectiveness of the lie. But again, this is where I think metaphor needs to be considered, right? And I've had people in the past say, "Well, I don't know if metaphor is a good word for it," which there's some irony to that. But I'd say that it's exactly, I think, the word that promotes the process that leads us to a better position, right? So if I say all communication is metaphor, whatever people say, they say as them, meaning you can't separate the identity from the communication. I think people wind up better off as a result of using that filter, you know. Joran Saxa asks, could this logic be used when presenting conspiracy theories? I mean, it applies, right? Well, I think, yeah. Well, I think the obvious answer, the quick answer is yes. I also think that even you look at the origin, the historicity of the term conspiracy theory, it was really to dismiss the significance of otherwise educated suspicions, by certain parties. And whether something is labeled a mystery, a conspiracy theory, or an unfortunate unknown, like, we can label it however we want to label it. But ultimately, if we want to determine the value and accuracy of what it's stating, there needs to be a process that is applied. It's like the process is the process. We could name the process however we want. We could name the impetus for the process however we want, but the process still is required. And I think that would be my position. And yeah, this could be applied to conspiracy theories or any other communication where we're trying to determine the consistent validity that could ultimately build a sort of relationship of expectation, right? So when I say that somebody, and I was just talking about this morning on my mastermind call, the definition of respecting somebody, I state as somebody is respectable when they are constantly presenting a consistent presentation of their identity. So to respect somebody is to be able to expect them to repeat being who they are. And I think when we're looking at something as being truth or not true, it ultimately comes down to the utility. It's like, well, what's the value of truth? It's like, well, it builds a consistent understanding of our ability to navigate the world. It's why I'm not also a big, I don't want to say believer. I'm not a big fan of gossip, right? Did you hear what happened with him and his wife? It's like, no. And before you tell me how it's going to add value to my life. And I think that lens makes me not susceptible to the distractions of other people's lies and influences, because I am constantly looking at the efficiency and the utility of the information I'm exposing myself to. Um, I watch TV shows, which some people say, well, how do you watch TV shows? Well, because I understand they're just TV shows. I understand that, one of my priorities every day is to maintain my state. I want to be high energy. I want to be optimistic. I want to be, action oriented. There are some things that I want to be every day from a universal sense, meaning it's not contingent upon what I happen to be going through that day. It's like I could suffer a tragedy in my family. I still don't think that that's an argument for you should be depressed and sad and in a bad mood. I think those things will happen, naturally, organically. And I accept that that's part of, the human process, but I don't think that's an argument for creating it preemptively just because, we're supposed to do that. Right. So being that my expectations are, I want to be a certain state, then I fill my life with things that support that. Right. So it's much more outcome based. If somebody's looking to share somebody else's secret, I mean, listen, to be completely honest, intel is intel. If you're going to find out something about somebody that that might, have use or utility later on, then sure, there's value in that. But like these gossip shows and like there are plenty of times, admittedly, that I'll look at this legal battle between this divorced celebrities and I'm trying to figure out what their goals are, trying to sort of weigh, where the sociopathy is, where the degeneracy is, where their experience is different. So I think there's still utility and maybe, I'm just validating or rationalizing why I do it too. But there are plenty of times where it's like, I don't care about this thing. Like I look at the Kardashians. Why are they so wealthy? I think it's their wealth is a direct correlation to the decadence of society, and I don't need to know what's going on with them. I don't want to know what's going on with them. And, but I also understand that there's a certain point where we can be conditioned into being curious about what's going on to them if we expose ourselves to the propagandized messaging of, mainstream media and entertainment. It's like it is in their best interest to condition us. Pavlovian conditioning, that is the process that they will continue to use because they know they could train us to want the things that they control. So long as they keep exposing us to the messaging that we should want it, right? Knowing that and the limitation of that, just aspect of the human brain, I will not expose myself to that messaging, right? Jamie says it's better to bluff weak when you're actually strong. Absolutely. Absolutely. I tell my students in martial arts, I tell my sons, we should not be looking for conflict, right? We should not be looking to fight with people all the time because every single time we fight them, we train them. The more we engage our enemies, the more prepared they are to engage us. So you want to avoid conflict. You want to train. You want to become more powerful. And you want to give them nothing up until the time when they've made the case for getting everything. And when you give them everything, you want to destroy them. We don't want to train people when we have conflict with them. We want to destroy them. If you're not willing to destroy them, then you shouldn't be fighting them in the first place, right? Corey says the Book of 48 Laws, power is filled with historic examples of lying dishonesty as a strategy to advance through life, and critics of the book are turned off by this. And we wrote something else. It could be said that those who can't understand these concepts are more likely the same people to be taken advantage of by the strategy. Really a fascinating topic. I would also add that some of the people that condemn it want to be sort of seen as people who condemn that because it allows them to utilize that strategy much more covertly as a result, right? See, I think one of the things that helped me make sense of my life and I'm somebody who, when I was younger, I've said this before, I was very, very violent. I was dysfunctionally violent. When I was a teenager, um, I was too frustrated. I didn't have the tools or the processes to really engage my surroundings in a way that didn't lead to violence. And living a life um, with that vulnerability for as long as I did, I had to build the case to grow out of that. And one of the things that I had to accept is that, again, I would say all communication is metaphor. I'll use an NLP concept to add understanding to this idea that I'm trying to share. Everybody's doing the best they can. And it wasn't until I discovered for myself the tribal wall that any of this made sense. I needed to be able to expect things from people in ways that, if they did not meet expectations, would not escalate to some sort of existential event in my life. There were times where, as a teenager, if I told somebody to, if I lent somebody $10 and they didn't want to give me back the $10, or they said they had it and they really didn't, and whatever, there are times where I would become so angry. And it was not so much them as what they were doing was having me lose trust in my circumstances. It's like, well, if this person who I expected to give me my $10 back doesn't give me the $10 back, then how do I trust anything that I expect? And it was just too volatile a filter to engage life. And so I had to determine what eventually, now, I have these TRIBALNOMICS formulas and philosophies that have really articulated and developed these systems that help me move away from that. But at the heart of it is understanding that people outside the wall, how we engage them is a move on the board. Inside the wall, it is a testament to your legacy. It's a testament to your fulfillment on an individual scale. But outside the wall, it's always going to be a move on the board within the boundaries of the alliance that you have with the individual. I've had people, beat me out of money. I've had people steal from me. I've had people, I once had somebody live in my house with his family, and years later had this individual look to undermine the integrity of my business online. I can't take offense at these things because I could say, well, he used to be inside the wall. And so these things were afforded to somebody inside the wall, but now he's outside the wall. So why would that have any bearing on what he's doing now? We are not within the boundaries of an alliance. So of course he's going to act that way. It's more of a testament to who he is than our alliance and what he should be doing to me. Or it's just a simpler way to engage people. Right. So when you look at people, now considering that last thing that you shared with Corey with the 48 laws of power, talking about how much utility can be had in misrepresentation and lying, and that's the way it should be. And I would say the person who's being lied to tactically by another party should have the wherewithal to know that this could be a misrepresentation of what is actually true. Because that is the thing. Now, let's say that my wife steals all my stuff. She takes my kids and she takes all my stuff and she moves to the other side of the world. That is an in-tribe thing. I would have to revisit who I am, what my life is, what my processes were, And how did I come to this thing? Like, I might spend my entire life looking to get my kids, tracking them down in a situation like that, because it is in tribe and it is deeply ingrained and connected to the purpose of my life. But people that I've had very, I would say, generous relationships with in the past, who are now outside of the tribal wall and are conducting themselves differently. How do I? There's no existential aspect of who I am to be considered. It just makes more sense this way. They're doing the best they can, given the tools and circumstances and resources they have available to them. I'm no longer an ally to them. I'm a narrative, and they're treating that narrative in a way that best benefits them. I understand the nature of this. So if somebody outside the wall lies to me to misrepresent something, I might be surprised, but I'll never be offended because really it's like, oh, that's who you are. Oh, that's what you're trying to do. And I would say, thinking of it that way, it drives me further up the ladder of becoming more powerful, in that it becomes that much harder for people to introduce a consequence to my life based on something that they misrepresented or lied about. You know, it's like you hire somebody and you hope it works out. But after a week of them being absolutely terrible and you fire them, you're anything but offended. It's like, yeah, they did the best they could. This is what the end result was. They got to go. This alliance, isn't working out. And you could be much more analytical about it. In books like 48 Laws of Power, it's like, yeah, those are the things that really capture these otherwise rejected aspects of how to be better at life that most people just don't want to consider. Corey says, more effective to look beyond the lies and find the motive instead of letting things like betrayal and dishonesty destroy you. And I would say, and I think this is certainly compatible with that, just look at it as information, right? So if all communication is metaphor, when somebody says something, they're saying it as metaphor, and it just begs the question, well, what does the metaphor represent? What are the intentions behind it? And sometimes people are emotional, right? And they say things out of an emotional reaction to some sort of stimulus. And you just know, like, what they're saying can't be weighed at face value. Now, what are some exceptions to this? It's like sometimes there are oaths, there are contracts, there are obligations that are codified that somebody anchors themselves to at a level of consequence, or the framework or structure of consequence or surrounding how they conduct themselves. That's different, right? I broke a lease, right, on once, and when I broke the lease, I tried to get out of it. I tried to negotiate. I tried to, whatever, didn't work. And I had to make a decision that was best for me and my family. The landlord was not in my tribe. The landlord was not somebody that was concerned with the outcome or the betterment of my family, nor should he be. So this was just a move on the board. I wound up moving to a bigger location. I wound up getting sued by the old landlord and having to settle. But when I looked at the whole thing, when it was over and done with, it's like he benefited and I benefited. And there was conflict, but in hindsight, there probably shouldn't have been. It's like, no, this is what's going to happen. And our ability to really deal with these elements of life and success specifically really determines the trajectory of our development. You look at the people that do a lot of things, the people that have accomplished a lot, an Elon Musk type, Donald Trump type. Like, you think these people don't have enemies? For every one person that you would consider an enemy in your life, they probably have 100 of them. And the enemies they have are super wealthy, super educated, super connected, super capable. It's just a different way to be. If you're able to maintain the discipline to look at these things as moves on the board and not some sort of personal attack, and it really comes from, not allowing people to let you down by accurately setting your expectations of them. This ties into that. I think it really finds you just in need of developing a process to be able to filter these things most productively. Right? All right, guys, let's end it there. I think that was a good share, a good talk. I appreciate you guys participating like you always do. Again, to conclude, if you guys are not getting my emails, you are fucking up. Go to masterchim.com/email. You can opt in on that page. The link should be in the description. I got books, I got shirts, I got programs, I got a whole bunch of stuff going down. You can check those things out in the description below. Aside from that, I will be here next week, same time. So as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.